The fluorescent lights of interrogation room B buzz with a constant low hum. 28-year-old Evelyn Vance sits at the cold metal table. Her expensive nightgown is completely soaked in the deep red blood of her family. She stares straight through the two frustrated detectives sitting across from her. She does not blink. She does not utter a single syllable. Society usually accepts the belief that severe trauma forces the human brain to shut down. People think total silence is a biological defense mechanism to protect the mind from unspeakable horror. We need to fundamentally challenge this psychological myth right now. What if silence is not an involuntary symptom of profound tragedy? What if silence is the most calculated offensive weapon ever used in a criminal investigation? The quiet house. The emergency dispatch center received the call at exactly 2:14 in the morning. There was no panicked voice on the other end of the line. The operator heard only the sound of heavy breathing and the faint noise of an electronic alarm ringing in the background. The call came from the Vance family estate. This estate sat on a massive plot of land far outside the city limits. The Vance family built their massive fortune in commercial real estate decades ago. Their home was a huge stone mansion surrounded by high iron gates and tall oak trees. The extreme isolation of the property meant that neighbors never heard anything. They never saw anything out of the ordinary. The nearest house was more than 2 miles away, down a winding gravel road. Officer David Miller took the dispatch call. He was a seasoned veteran of the police force who usually spent his night shifts patrolling the empty suburban highways. He fully expected a false alarm. Rich families often had complex security systems that went off for absolutely no reason. A stray dog or a falling tree branch could easily trigger the sensitive perimeter sensors. Miller drove his cruiser up the long, winding driveway and parked near the grand entrance. The rain began to pour from the dark sky. The heavy oak front door of the mansion was wide open. The cold wind blew rain directly into the grand foyer. Miller drew his service weapon and stepped inside. The house was dead quiet, the kind of absolute quiet that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. He clicked on his heavy tactical flashlight. The bright beam cut through the darkness and landed on the imported marble floor. The white marble was covered in thick, crimson footprints. The muddy, bloody footprints led from the front door deep into the belly of the dark house. Miller called for immediate backup over his shoulder radio. He knew he could not wait for the other patrol cars to arrive. He had to clear the massive house to secure any potential survivors. He followed the terrible trail of footprints down the main hallway. The walls were lined with expensive oil paintings and framed family portraits. The faces of the Vance family smiled down at him from the frames. The contrast between those happy faces and the bloody floor was jarring. The house smelled of raw copper and damp earth. Miller moved with slow caution and kept his gun raised at eye level. He checked the formal living room. It was empty. He checked the grand dining room. It was empty. The bloody footprints continued up the grand curving staircase to the second floor. The red hallways. The second floor of the mansion contained the master suite and the large bedrooms of the children. Miller reached the top of the stairs and pointed his flashlight down the long, carpeted corridor. The heavy wooden door to the master bedroom was violently broken off its metal hinges. The wood was splintered and scattered across the plush carpet. Miller stepped into the room and found Arthur and Eleanor Vance. The scene was pure chaos. The large room looked like a hurricane had ripped through it. Heavy furniture was overturned. Expensive glass lamps were smashed on the hardwood floor. White feathers from the torn pillows floated in the damp air. Arthur and Eleanor did not survive the brutal attack. The specific details of the assault were horrifying, but the criminal intention was crystal clear. Someone wanted them dead and wanted to make a vicious point. The violence was highly personal. It was definitely not a random nighttime robbery. None of the expensive diamond jewelry sitting on the wooden dresser was touched. The large steel safe in the corner of the room remained locked and perfectly intact. Miller backed out of the master suite and continued down the long hall. The next door belonged to Thomas Vance, the older brother. Thomas was a competitive athlete and a very strong man. The massive signs of a physical struggle in his room showed that he tried to fight back against the intruder. The glass window was shattered. The heavy curtains were torn from the wall. Thomas lay on the floor near his ruined bed. He was gone too. The very last door at the far end of the hallway belonged to Evelyn. The white door was completely closed. There was absolutely no blood on the brass doorknob. Miller pushed the door open with his heavy boot. He expected to find another tragic, bloody scene. Instead, he found Evelyn sitting perfectly still on the edge of her perfectly made bed. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her silk nightgown was covered in fresh blood. The blood belonged to her dead family. Her face was pale white and her eyes were wide open. She stared blankly at the floral wallpaper. Miller slowly lowered his gun and spoke to her in a calm voice. He asked if she was physically hurt. He asked who did this terrible thing to her family. Evelyn did not answer him. She did not even look at him. She just sat there in the crushing silence. The backup police sirens wailed loudly in the distance, getting closer to the gated estate. The house filled with loud police officers and busy crime scene investigators within the hour. They took hundreds of photos of the bodies. They dusted the walls for fingerprints. They bagged pieces of broken evidence. Through all of this loud noise and chaotic activity, Evelyn never moved a single muscle. 2 officers had to gently lift her by the arms and guide her down the grand staircase. She walked out of the house like a wooden puppet with cut strings. The interrogation. The police transported Evelyn directly to the main precinct downtown. They placed her in interrogation room B. The room was small and painted a dull, depressing grey. A single large 2-way mirror spanned one entire wall. Several detectives stood behind the dark glass and watched her every move. Lead Detective Marcus Thorne took charge of the high-profile case. Thorne had 20 hard years of experience working brutal homicides. He had seen everything from street gang violence to messy crimes of passion. He firmly thought he understood exactly how the human mind reacted to profound tragedy. Thorne entered the small room with a female patrol officer. They brought Evelyn a paper cup of water and a warm wool blanket. They tried their best to make her comfortable in the cold room. Thorne started the interview with gentle, easy questions. He asked for her full name. He asked if she needed a medical doctor. He asked if she remembered anything at all from the night. Evelyn sat like a carved stone statue. Her breathing was shallow and perfectly even. She did not flinch when Thorne slammed a thick manila folder on the metal table to test her physical reaction. She did not flinch when the female officer placed a warm, comforting hand on her narrow shoulder. The frustrated detectives left the room to discuss their strategy in the hallway. They all naturally assumed Evelyn was suffering from extreme psychological shock. The human brain can only handle so much trauma before it builds a mental wall to protect itself. They believed her fragile mind retreated into a dark corner to hide from the terrible memories of the massacre. They officially classified her as the sole, tragic survivor of a home invasion. This rapid classification was a massive mistake. It completely blinded the seasoned investigators to the glaring mathematical anomalies hidden perfectly within the blood spatter of the crime scene. They treated her like a fragile piece of broken glass. They did not pause to consider that a silent survivor could be anything else. They did not notice the small physical inconsistencies yet. They did not wonder how she got covered in so much blood if her bedroom door was completely closed and untouched by the killer. They just wanted to hear her speak. They believed her hidden voice was the only key to catching the phantom killer. They brought in a professional police grief counselor. The trained counselor spent 2 full hours in the tight room with Evelyn. The final result was exactly the same. Absolute, unyielding silence. The medical bay. Detective Thorne eventually decided that keeping Evelyn at the police station was a complete waste of valuable time. She needed official medical clearance before they could transfer her to a police safe house. 2 officers drove her to the main county hospital for a full physical examination. The hospital staff ushered her into a private examination room far away from the busy, loud emergency room. 2 gentle nurses cleaned the dried, flaking blood from her cold skin and gave her fresh blue hospital scrubs. A senior doctor arrived to check her vital signs. He listened to her heart with a stethoscope. and checked her pupils with a small penlight. Everything appeared perfectly normal on the physical surface. She had no cuts or deep bruises. She had no defensive scratch wounds on her hands. The senior doctor decided to run a standard blood test to check for hidden sedatives or physiological shock. The nurses drew 2 glass vials of dark blood from her arm. Evelyn did not wince when the sharp needle pierced her blue vein. The busy hospital lab processed the blood work on a rush order. 10 minutes later, the doctor received the printed initial toxicology report. He looked at the paper and frowned deeply. He walked out to the busy waiting room to find Detective Thorne. The doctor explained that the blood test showed something practically impossible. The suppressed report revealed the heavy presence of a rare, localized synthetic neurotoxin in her bloodstream. This specific chemical was definitely not a common recreational drug. It was not a standard medical sedative used for anxiety. It was a highly specialized, expensive compound designed to target specific nerve endings in the human body. The doctor explained that the powerful toxin localized around the human throat and the vocal cords. It completely paralyzed the muscles needed for human speech. Evelyn was not rendered mute by psychological shock at all. She was chemically imprisoned inside her own body by a phantom assailant. She could not speak even if she desperately wanted to. She was physically trapped in a state of forced silence. This horrifying revelation changed the entire scope of the investigation. The shocked detectives realized the unknown killer went to incredible, expensive lengths to make sure Evelyn could not identify them to the police. The killer did not just want to murder the rich family. The killer wanted to leave a living witness who could never tell the true story. This specific action required intense planning and access to rare, restricted chemicals. It was not a random nighttime break-in gone wrong. It was a highly calculated surgical strike against the Vance family. The invisible threat. The fortress. The shocking discovery of the paralyzing neurotoxin escalated the threat level of the case. The killer was clearly sophisticated, wealthy, and very dangerous. Detective Thorne knew the regular county hospital was not safe enough to protect their only living witness. Anyone could walk through the automatic front doors of the public hospital. They needed a highly secure location. The police department arranged a quiet transfer to the isolated, secure wing of St. Jude's psychiatric facility. St. Jude's was built like a modern concrete fortress. The massive building sat on a steep hill overlooking the sprawling city. High concrete walls surrounded the manicured grounds. Armed security guards checked every single vehicle at the front iron gate before letting them pass. The psychiatric ward had an entire restricted floor dedicated to high-profile or dangerous patients. The large windows were made of thick reinforced glass that could not be broken with a hammer. The heavy steel doors locked automatically and required a programmed magnetic keycard to open. The police placed Evelyn in room 412 at the very end of the long hall. The room was stark white, with a simple heavy bed bolted directly to the floor. A digital camera mounted in the corner monitored the small room 24 hours a day. 2 armed local police officers stood guard in the bright hallway right outside her door. They worked in rotating 12-hour shifts to ensure someone was always awake and alert. Evelyn lay in the uncomfortable hospital bed. A clear intravenous line dripped saline fluids into her arm to help flush the dangerous neurotoxin out of her system. The doctors said it would take several long days for the paralytic chemical to wear off completely. Until then, she remained a silent prisoner in a locked medical cage. She was completely cut off from the outside world. The police felt very confident they had secured the target. They believed she was completely untouchable behind those locked doors. The money trail. While Evelyn rested in the secure medical facility, Detective Thorne returned to the busy precinct to dig deep into the private lives of the Vance family. He needed to understand why someone would target them with such brutal precision. Thorne requested a special team of forensic accountants to help map the complex financial records of the Vance empire. The deep investigation started with the family real estate business. Arthur Vance owned dozens of large commercial properties across the state. On paper, the massive company was worth millions of dollars. The general public believed the family was incredibly wealthy and successful. The hidden reality was very different. Thorne and his dedicated team spent 3 days reviewing bank statements, tax returns, and private corporate emails. They uncovered a massive labyrinth of hidden resentments and total financial ruin. Arthur Vance made a long series of terrible, risky investments over the past 5 years. He borrowed heavily against his own properties to fund new projects. The real estate market shifted downward, and he could not repay the massive bank loans. The company was bleeding money every single month. The savings accounts were completely drained. Arthur even started moving illegal funds into hidden offshore accounts to hide his remaining assets from the angry banks. The famous family was on the very edge of total bankruptcy. The smart accountants found something else hidden in the files. They found a massive, multi-million-dollar life insurance policy. This special policy covered Arthur, Eleanor, and Thomas. The policy payout was incredibly large. The cash would be enough to clear all the massive family debts and leave a fortune behind for the survivor. Thorne looked closely at the signature date on the printed documents. The policy was quietly updated just 48 hours before the bloody slaughter. The primary beneficiary was completely changed. The new legal policy named Evelyn as the sole recipient of the entire fortune in the event of their sudden deaths. The entire focus of the case drastically shifted in an instant. The terrible crime was no longer a random act of brutal violence. It was a highly sophisticated, financially motivated execution. The killer knew all about the hidden money. The killer knew about the updated insurance policy. Thorne realized the killer left Evelyn alive on purpose. If the whole family died together, the suspicious insurance company might delay the payout or investigate the business for fraud. Leaving one traumatized, silent survivor made the tragedy look completely real to the public. It ensured the massive policy would pay out in cash, without question. The killer was simply waiting for the money to clear the bank. The night shift. The investigation team used a digital warrant to trace the illegal purchase of the synthetic neurotoxin. They followed a confusing digital trail of encrypted emails and fake corporate invoices. The rare chemical was bought by a fake shell company registered in another country. Thorne managed to find a single domestic bank account linked to that shell company. He requested the private bank records and found a real name. The name belonged to a man named Richard Cole. Thorne ran a deep background check on Richard Cole. He fully expected to find a professional hitman or a dangerous corporate spy. Instead, he found a very normal, boring employment record. Richard Cole was a certified medical worker. He had a long history of working in various private clinics and city hospitals. Thorne checked his current place of employment to send a squad car. The computer result made Thorne drop his coffee mug on the floor. Richard Cole currently worked as the lead night orderly at St. Jude's psychiatric facility. He was specifically assigned to the secure wing. The audience now sees the terrifying reality of the situation through the hospital security footage. The black and white video shows the quiet, empty hallway of the secure ward. The two armed police officers stand near the metal elevators, drinking coffee and talking about sports. They guard the physical perimeter of the floor. They do not guard the trusted medical staff. Richard Cole wears standard blue hospital scrubs. He pushes a small metal medical cart down the bright hall. He smiles warmly and nods at the police officers. They step aside to let him pass without a second thought. They completely trust the medical uniform. They deeply trust the normal routine of the hospital. Cole stops in front of room 412. He swipes his magnetic key card. The heavy steel door unlocks with a soft electronic click. He steps into the quiet room and closes the door behind him. The camera inside the room shows Evelyn lying in her bed. She is physically restrained by the heavy medical equipment. The thick hospital blankets pin her down. The short IV line tethers her arm to the metal pole. She cannot speak. She cannot call out to the armed officers standing just a few feet away on the other side of the door. Cole walks casually over to the bed. He checks her plastic IV bag. He writes something down on her medical chart. He plays the role of the caring medical professional perfectly. This creates a massive gap in information. The detectives at the police precinct are just now realizing who Cole is. They are miles away across the city. The police officers in the hospital hallway think Cole is just doing his normal job. Only the audience knows that the lethal predator has unfettered access to the isolated room. Evelyn is completely stripped of her personal agency. She is utterly unable to run away. She cannot fight back against him. She cannot scream for help. The true psychological dread of the situation comes from the environment itself. The lethal threat is buried deeply under the sterile, quiet, and deeply trusted routine of a hospital ward. The safest place on Earth is actually a locked cage surrounded by the enemy. Thorne grabs his heavy radio and shouts for his partner. They run out of the precinct and jump into their police cruiser. They turn on the loud sirens and speed through the wet city streets. They pray they can reach the secure facility before the orderly finishes his job. They know the insurance money makes Evelyn a loose end. Now that the rest of the family is dead, the killer does not need her to play the victim anymore. The silence is no longer enough to protect the secret. The impending storm. The weather outside the high concrete walls of the hospital begins to turn violent. The steady rain from the night of the brutal murders was nothing compared to the massive storm brewing now. Heavy dark clouds roll over the sleeping city. Loud thunder shakes the thick windows of the hospital. The cold wind howls around the concrete walls of St. Jude's. Inside the secure psychiatric wing, the overhead lights flicker for a fraction of a second. The storm threatens to knock out the primary power grid. Cole finishes writing on the medical chart and looks down at Evelyn. Her eyes track his slow movements. She watches him reach into the front pocket of his blue scrubs. His hand rests on something hidden inside the fabric. He does not pull it out yet. He just stands there and watches her breathe. He knows she cannot make a sound to alert the guards. The silence in the small room is heavy and suffocating. It is the kind of thick silence that precedes a total disaster. The police car races up the winding hill toward the hospital gates, fighting against the driving rain and the slick roads. Time is rapidly running out. The comfortable illusion of safety is entirely gone. The true nature of the trap is finally clear. Everything is perfectly set for the final confrontation in the dark. The gathering storm. The atmospheric pressure over the sleeping city begins to drop rapidly. Heavy storm systems collide above the concrete towers of the downtown district. Thick, rolling black clouds block out the light of the moon and the stars. A torrential downpour washes over the high concrete walls of St. Jude's psychiatric facility. Thousands of gallons of freezing rainwater pool on the flat roof of the hospital and cascade down the thick, reinforced glass windows. The massive, ancient oak trees on the manicured front lawns bend and groan under the sheer physical force of the howling wind. Deep inside the city grid, a massive bolt of lightning strikes a primary power transformer. The resulting explosion sends a catastrophic shockwave through the municipal electrical system. Streetlights shatter and go dark in a cascading wave of failure. The blackout rolls up the steep hill toward the isolated medical fortress. The overhead fluorescent lights inside the secure psychiatric wing flicker for a fraction of a second. The bright white illumination dies completely. The sudden, absolute darkness swallows the long medical corridor. A heavy silence falls over the entire floor as the large ventilation machines stop pushing cold air through the ceiling ducts. 10 seconds pass in total blackness. The heavy diesel backup generators in the hospital basement detect the massive power failure. The engines cough and roar to life. They pump a limited supply of electricity back into the critical life support systems of the building. The primary lighting grid remains dead to conserve valuable fuel. Small emergency bulbs mounted high on the walls click on. These bulbs cast a deep, oppressive red glow across the sterile white floor tiles. The familiar, safe hospital environment instantly transforms into a claustrophobic, shadowed maze. The desperate drive. Miles away from the psychiatric hospital, Detective Marcus Thorne fights a losing battle against the severe weather. The heavy police cruiser acts as a steel battering ram cutting through the flooded city avenues. Thorne grips the leather steering wheel with brutal force. His knuckles turn pale white under the tension. The thick rubber tires hydroplane across deep, hidden puddles on the broken asphalt. He wrestles the heavy vehicle to maintain control while the engine roars in protest. The windshield wipers slap back and forth at maximum speed. but they cannot clear the massive sheets of water obscuring his vision. Officer Jenkins sits in the passenger seat with a white-knuckle grip on the dashboard. Jenkins shouts into the heavy police radio mounted on the center console. The dispatch operator crackles through the static to confirm the total blackout at the medical facility. Thorne presses his heavy boot down on the accelerator pedal. The cruiser surges forward through a red traffic light that no longer functions. Thorne understands the strict underlying medical protocols of a modern psychiatric facility. He knows the heavy steel security doors require a constant flow of electricity to maintain their magnetic locks. When the main power grid fails, the magnetic seals automatically disengage to prevent trapping helpless patients in the event of a structural fire. The entire concrete fortress becomes completely porous and vulnerable. Thorne barks a harsh explanation over the sound of the rain. He tells Jenkins exactly why Richard Cole is the most dangerous kind of predator. Cole does not carry a gun or a hunting knife. Cole carries the specialized knowledge of a trained medical professional. Thorne explains the horrifying reality of potassium chloride. This common chemical salt is a standard medical treatment used in every hospital in the country. Doctors routinely prescribe diluted bags of it to treat patients with low blood electrolytes. The human heart requires a very specific, delicate balance of potassium and sodium to maintain a regular electrical rhythm. The steady pumping action of the heart relies entirely on this chemical equilibrium. If someone introduces a massive, highly concentrated dose of potassium chloride directly into the human bloodstream, the delicate electrical system experiences a catastrophic overload. The cardiac muscles lock down in a state of permanent, violent contraction. The heart simply stops beating in a fraction of a second. The human body registers this sudden failure as a massive natural heart attack. A standard medical autopsy will never detect the foul play. The county medical examiner will just see an elevated potassium level in the blood. They will assume the extreme psychological stress of the brutal home invasion caused a fatal cardiac event. It is the perfect, untraceable murder weapon. Thorne realizes the terrifying timeline of the killer's plan. Cole purchased the synthetic neurotoxin to paralyze Evelyn and create a living witness for the insurance company. Now that the multi-million-dollar insurance policy is processed and ready to pay out, Evelyn is no longer a necessary part of the equation. She has transformed from an asset into a massive liability. The police car races up the winding, slippery hill toward the iron gates of the hospital. Time is rapidly bleeding away. The distracted guards. The sudden blackout inside the secure wing causes immediate, widespread chaos among the night staff. The heavy steel doors separating the different patient wards unlock with a simultaneous, loud metallic clank. Patients in the lower security areas begin to wander out of their rooms in the confusing red light. The loud, piercing wail of a security alarm echoes down the main stairwell. The two armed local police officers stationed outside room 412 react to the sudden noise. They draw their heavy black flashlights and shine the bright beams down the dark corridor. A frantic nurse runs out of the elevator bank and begs the officers for immediate physical assistance. She needs strong hands to help secure an agitated, violent patient who is trying to break a window in the recreation room. The officers look at the heavy door of room 412. They know Evelyn is physically tethered to a medical bed and completely paralyzed by the lingering effects of the neurotoxin. They believe she is completely safe inside the dark room. They make a critical, fatal error in judgment. They step away from their assigned post to help the panicked nurse. They jog down the long hallway, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum, leaving the secure corridor completely abandoned. Richard Cole steps out of the deep shadows near the empty nursing station. He wears his standard, loose-fitting blue hospital scrubs. The soft fabric rustles against his legs as he moves into the dim red light. He watches the beams of the police flashlights disappear around the far corner of the ward. He stands completely alone in the silent hallway. He reaches his right hand into the deep front pocket of his uniform. His long fingers wrap around the cold, smooth glass of a small medical vial. He feels the sharp plastic cap of a sterile syringe resting next to the glass. He takes a deep, calming breath. He steps away from the nursing station and turns his body toward room 412. The comfortable illusion of safety within the hospital shatters. The ultimate trap is finally set. The measured approach. Cole takes his first deliberate step down the hallway. The thick rubber sole of his white orthopedic shoe compresses against the damp linoleum floor. The friction generates a sharp, high-pitched squeak. The sound bounces off the blank white walls and echoes in the empty space. He pauses to listen to the ambient noise of the building. He hears the low, vibrating hum of the backup diesel generator rumbling through the floorboards. He hears the violent storm battering the reinforced glass at the end of the hall. He takes another slow, calculated step forward. Inside the small room, the air feels incredibly thick and stagnant. The primary ventilation system stopped pushing cold, filtered air through the overhead metal vents when the power grid died. The only source of illumination is the small caged emergency bulb mounted directly above the heavy wooden door. The bulb casts a deep, oppressive red glow across the stark, sterile space. The dark shadows in the corners of the room stretch and contort like living things. Evelyn Vance lies flat on her back on the narrow, uncomfortable mattress. Her head rests against a thin, cheap hospital pillow. Heavy canvas restraining straps cross over her chest to secure her upper body to the metal bed frame. A clear plastic tube runs from a hanging fluid bag down into a small blue vein in the back of her left hand. The soothing saline solution drips with a steady, rhythmic consistency. One single drop of clear fluid falls from the plastic nozzle inside the chamber. A tiny splash echoes in the silent room. Another drop forms at the very tip of the nozzle. It hangs suspended in the air for a fraction of a second. It releases and falls into the pool below. The endless cycle repeats over and over. Evelyn stares up at the cracked white ceiling. She hears the faint squeak of the rubber shoe in the hallway. She tracks the sound as it moves closer to her door. Society assumes that a locked room provides unparalleled safety from the horrors of the outside world. We build strong brick walls and install heavy steel locks to keep the dangerous elements of society away from our fragile bodies. We place blind trust in these physical barriers to preserve our lives. This fundamental trust creates a massive, fatal blind spot in human awareness. When the lethal predator already exists inside the locked room, the impenetrable walls serve a completely different, horrifying purpose. They no longer keep the monster out. They keep the helpless victim trapped inside. The concrete fortress transforms into a sealed, soundproof tomb. Cole takes another step. His heavy, labored breathing filters through the small gap under the door. He stops right outside room 412. He raises his hand and places his palm flat against the cool wood. He listens for any movement inside the room. He hears nothing but the rhythmic dripping of the saline bag. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a heavy brass master key. He inserts the jagged metal into the deadbolt lock. The metal grinds against the internal tumblers. The heavy lock mechanisms slide back with a loud final click. Cole pushes the heavy wooden door open. The rusted metal hinges groan in protest. He steps over the threshold and enters the oppressive red glow of the room. He closes the door softly behind him, sealing them both inside the dark chamber. The lethal dose. Cole stands at the foot of the metal bed. He looks down at Evelyn. Her chest rises and falls with shallow, measured breaths. Her pale face remains completely expressionless in the shadows. The canvas restraints hold her torso firmly against the mattress. The clear IV line tethers her left arm to the tall metal pole. She appears completely helpless and utterly devoid of agency. She cannot run away from the approaching danger. She cannot fight back against a strong man. She cannot scream to alert the guards down the hall, because the localized synthetic neurotoxin still grips her vocal cords. The highly specialized chemical blocks the vital electrical signals traveling from her brain to the muscles in her throat. She can process complex thoughts. She can hear the violent storm raging outside the window. She can feel the cold, damp air in the room. She simply cannot convert her internal panic into a vocal warning. Cole reaches into the deep pocket of his hospital scrubs. His fingers retrieve the cold glass of the medical vial. He pulls the vial up into the dim red light. He inspects the tight rubber seal at the top of the glass to ensure it is intact. He produces the sterile plastic syringe from his other pocket. He tears the paper wrapper open with his teeth and spits the trash onto the floor. He pulls the clear plastic cap off the sharp, hollow steel needle. He presses the tip of the needle through the rubber seal of the vial. He turns the glass upside down. He pulls the plastic plunger back with his thumb. The thick, clear liquid fills the empty chamber of the syringe. He pulls the needle out of the rubber seal. He holds the filled syringe up toward the glowing red emergency bulb. He taps the side of the plastic barrel with his fingernail. A tiny bubble of trapped air rises through the liquid to the very top of the chamber. He pushes the plunger forward a fraction of an inch to force the air out. A single drop of concentrated potassium chloride forms on the sharp bevel of the needle. The chemical weapon is perfectly prepared. Cole steps around the foot of the bed and approaches the metal IV pole. He locates the small, self-sealing rubber injection port on the clear plastic line feeding into Evelyn's hand. He holds the port between his thumb and index finger. He lowers the deadly needle toward the rubber surface. The tension in the small room reaches a breaking point. The killing stroke is only seconds away. The unbroken patient. Cole leans over the narrow bed. He brings the tip of the needle within an inch of the injection port. He braces his stance to push the heavy plunger down. Suddenly, Evelyn's right hand moves. The movement is not weak or uncoordinated. It is entirely deliberate and terrifyingly fast. Her hand shoots across the white hospital blanket. She grabs Cole's thick wrist with a bone-crushing, vice-like grip. The sudden physical shock causes Cole to freeze completely in place. He gasps and tries to pull his arm back, but her fingers dig deep into his skin. Her strength is impossible for a victim suffering from severe chemical paralysis. The canvas restraints holding her torso are still tight, but she managed to slip her right arm out from under the heavy blankets. Evelyn turns her head on the thin pillow. She looks directly into Cole's wide, panicked eyes. The blank, traumatized stare vanishes completely from her face. A sharp, calculating intelligence replaces the mask of the broken victim. She pulls his wrist an inch closer to her face. She opens her mouth. The paralyzed vocal cords flex and vibrate. She draws a deep breath into her lungs. "You are late," she whispers. Her voice is incredibly raspy and dry from days of intentional disuse, but the words are perfectly clear. The harsh whisper slices through the heavy silence of the room. This single, deliberate sentence completely shatters the entire foundation of the investigation. It forces a massive, mind-bending recontextualization of every single piece of evidence collected by the police. Richard Cole does not struggle to break free from her iron grip. He does not raise the syringe to attack her. He lets out a long, shaky breath and relaxes his shoulders. He looks down at the woman in the bed and nods his head. "The power outage took longer to bypass the secondary grid than we anticipated," Cole whispers back. "I had to wait for the guards to leave the floor." This quiet exchange reveals the most horrifying truth of the entire massacre. Richard Cole was never a hired assassin sent by a shadowy enemy to silence a loose end. He was never a threat to Evelyn Vance. He is her completely loyal, highly paid accomplice. Evelyn did not survive a random home invasion. She orchestrated the entire brutal slaughter of her own parents and her older brother. She designed every single detail of the nightmare. She researched the specific chemical properties of the rare synthetic neurotoxin. She used a hidden, encrypted laptop to contact Cole through a secure dark web medical forum. She wired a massive sum of stolen money from her father's failing real estate accounts to the foreign shell company to purchase the drug. She paid Cole to secure the package and prepare the specific dosages. Evelyn hated her family with a cold, burning passion. She despised her father for squandering their massive fortune on terrible business investments. She loathed her mother for ignoring the financial ruin closing in around them. She resented her athletic older brother, who always commanded the attention of the room. She knew about the massive, multi-million-dollar life insurance policy. She knew her father updated the beneficiary documents to name her as the sole recipient. She realized the only way to claim the fortune and escape the crushing debt was to eliminate them all in one single bloody night. She also knew the police would immediately suspect the sole surviving heir of a wealthy family. She needed an alibi that was absolutely impenetrable. She needed to become the ultimate, unimpeachable victim. She created a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. She unlocked the heavy front doors of the estate to let Cole inside. She guided him through the dark hallways to slaughter her parents and her brother while they slept. When the brutal work was done, she returned to her own bedroom. She sat on the edge of her bed and allowed Cole to inject her throat with the localized neurotoxin. She specifically calculated the dosage to paralyze only her vocal cords, leaving her basic motor functions completely intact. She locked herself inside her own body on purpose. She weaponized her forced silence to build a wall of pure sympathy around herself. The seasoned detectives, the trained medical staff, and the professional grief counselors all looked at her mute state and saw profound, crippling trauma. They never suspected that a victim would willingly subject herself to chemical paralysis just to hide a terrible crime. They handed her the perfect defense on a silver platter. The final command. Evelyn releases her tight grip on Cole's wrist. She lets her hand fall back onto the white blanket. "Did you bring the saline?" she asks. Her voice grows a little stronger with each spoken word. Cole reaches into his other pocket and pulls out a second, identical syringe. The barrel is filled with harmless salt water. "Yes, just like you instructed. The potassium chloride is for show. The saline is for the injection." "Good," Evelyn says. "The detectives traced the shell company back to your name. They traced your employment records to this hospital. They are on their way here right now to stop you from killing me." Cole's eyes widen in sudden panic. "You told me the police would not figure out the paper trail for another week. You promised me I had time to disappear before they connected the money to my account." "Plans change," Evelyn says with a cold, hollow smile. "The lead detective is smarter than I anticipated, but this works perfectly for our narrative. The insurance company needs final proof that a killer is actively hunting me before they release the massive payout. They need an arrest." She commands him to switch the syringes. She tells him to inject the harmless saline into her IV line so the hospital monitors show a spike in fluid pressure. "When the police burst through that door, you will not fight them," Evelyn orders him. Her tone is absolute and commanding. "You will drop the empty syringe on the floor. You will let them tackle you to the ground. You will confess to the murders of my family. You will tell them my father owed massive gambling debts to dangerous people, and you were hired to collect the money and wipe out the bloodline. I will spend the rest of my life in a concrete cell," Cole whispers, his hands shaking as he holds the two syringes. "You will spend exactly 6 months in a cell," Evelyn corrects him. "I already paid a very expensive team of defense lawyers to wait for your phone call. They will tie the legal system in knots. They will challenge the chain of evidence. They will find procedural errors in the police work. When the insurance money clears my bank account, I will fund your entire legal defense through an anonymous trust. You will walk out of the courtroom a rich, free man. But if you try to run away right now, the police will hunt you down in the storm and shoot you in the back." Cole looks at the heavy wooden door. He listens to the raging storm outside. He looks back at the cold, calculating woman lying on the bed. He realizes he is completely trapped in her web. He made a deal with a true monster, and now he must play his assigned part to the bitter end. He nods his head in defeat. He places the lethal syringe full of potassium chloride on the metal tray table. He takes the harmless syringe full of saline and pierces the rubber injection port. He pushes the plunger down. The clear liquid mixes with the fluid in the IV line. Heavy, frantic footsteps echo down the hallway outside the room. The sound of heavy police boots slaps against the wet linoleum. Detective Thorne shouts orders to Officer Jenkins. They have breached the secure wing. Evelyn quickly slides her right arm back under the thick hospital blankets. She forces her facial muscles to relax completely. She widens her eyes to simulate pure, helpless terror. She turns her head away from Cole and stares blankly at the far wall. She instantly rebuilds the flawless illusion of the silent, broken patient. The false rescue. The heavy brass handle of the door violently twists. A heavy boot kicks the solid wood just below the lock. The wooden frame splinters and cracks under the massive physical impact. The door flies open and slams hard against the interior wall. The loud crash shakes the entire room. Detective Thorne bursts through the doorway with his heavy service weapon drawn and leveled. Officer Jenkins follows a second later with his flashlight cutting through the red darkness. "Drop it!" Thorne roars at the top of his lungs. His voice booms with pure adrenaline and rage. Cole plays his part perfectly. He drops the empty plastic syringe onto the linoleum floor. He raises both of his hands high into the air. He steps away from the medical bed and drops to his knees. Jenkins rushes forward, grabs Cole by the back of his uniform, and slams him face first against the concrete floor. The loud snap of heavy steel handcuffs echoes in the small room as Jenkins secures the prisoner. Thorne holsters his weapon and rushes to the side of the bed. He looks at the discarded syringe on the floor. He looks at the clear IV line attached to Evelyn's hand. He checks her vital monitors. Her heart rate is slightly elevated from the noise, but she is perfectly stable. Thorne lets out a massive sigh of profound relief. He places a large, comforting hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "You are safe now, Evelyn," Thorne says in a soft, gentle voice. "We got him. The nightmare is finally over. He can never hurt you again." Evelyn Vance slowly turns her head to look at the exhausted detective. She does not say a single word. She allows a single, perfect tear to roll down her pale cheek. She blinks slowly, projecting an image of absolute gratitude and fragile innocence. Thorne smiles back at her, completely convinced that his frantic drive through the violent storm just saved the life of a helpless, traumatized victim. He believes justice prevailed in the dark room. He has no idea that he just secured the final piece of Evelyn's master plan. He just handed a vicious, calculating predator the keys to a massive financial empire. The police will process the crime scene. The insurance company will release the money. The silent patient will walk out of the hospital a very rich, very free woman. The most terrifying monsters in our world are not the ones who forcefully break down our doors in the dead of night. The truly dangerous predators are the ones who patiently sit inside the interrogation room, wearing the flawless mask of a broken victim, while quietly holding every single card. If you thought Evelyn's calculated deception was an isolated incident of pure psychological manipulation, you are entirely unprepared for the horrifying reality of what the investigators uncovered next. Click the video on your screen titled "What Happened Next Shocked Everyone" to uncover the chilling details.